These are sort of different issues, and therefore there will always be multiple channels to address disparate objectives. Now, one of the problems has been that there haven't been any satisfactory exit provisions for the MSME sector. I'm not going to use either the word insolvency or bankruptcy deliberately, but there have not been any satisfactory exit provisions. Thanks to the code, we now have the beginnings of this. Now, this is not to suggest that all MSMEs are going to close down. This is not to suggest that there should not be revival issues, but this is limited to MSME for which one needs satisfactory exit provisions. That is what this meeting was also about.
And you made in the opening remarks that unfortunately many of the MSMEs are not registered, and that still remains an important concern. How do you see it, sir?
An enterprise, when we are talking about an enterprise needs to have some kind of a legal identity. If I am going to separate out an enterprise from the entrepreneur, in any limited liability, I try to separate the individual from this enterprise to the extent I can do so. Very few MSMEs are registered as companies. If they are registered as companies, it becomes easier from the insolvency point of view. A few are registered not under companies, but let's say the Partnership Act. But 95% are not registered. You cannot force registration. Registration happens over a period of time. It is also true that India as an economy is one where large chunk of the society and the economy is in the informal and unorganized sector. When it comes to those that are not registered under the Companies Act, then the working group is working on it, and one will have to satisfactorily work out some provisions. The code per se covers everyone. My limited point is that it will be easier for those that have legal identity under the Companies Act, and certainly it will be easier for those which are registered. It will be much more difficult to separate the entrepreneur from the enterprise for those which are not registered.
True, sir. But then again, there is one important concern that the cost which was being discussed, it remains very high, and many small or micro enterprises might not be able to afford such huge costs.
Well, it is not always MSMEs who can invoke the provisions. The cost it may also be invoked by the other side, in which case the cost will be borne by the other side. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, costs remain a concern, but the question is, what are you comparing it with? Today also, if you don't have this, there are costs, and those costs are much, much more serious, even though it may be difficult to quantify the costs of being imprisoned. Compared to those costs, I accept your point that the costs are likely to be high, but compared to those costs, these costs are not going to be as high.